welcome back to another episode of the Young Professionals podcast, where we're talking to young professionals to understand what they're doing in their day-to-day roles and to hear about their journey, about how they got there. Sarge, who are we speaking with today?
Today, we have Anthony England. Anthony England is the head of growth at a Melbourne-based artificial intelligence company, Affinda. Anthony completed his undergraduate studies at Monash University, where he studied a double degree in commerce and engineering. After a range of internships in different industries, Anthony started his career as a management consultant at Bain & Company. During his time at Bain, Anthony worked across many different countries and continents and with a range of different clients, tackling their hardest problems. After Bain, Anthony made the move to equity capital markets, where he spent a few years raising capital for private and publicly listed companies before taking his current role at Affinda. Affinda provides AI solutions to automate high-volume document workflows. The company's goal is to enable people to benefit from AI automation so that the AI can take care of the tedious manual work and the people can focus on higher value activities. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sarge. Thanks, Luke. How are you guys going?
Good, thank you.
Very well.
Good to be here.
So we might just start with what your role of head of growth at Affinda actually entails.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best. I think at any startup, roles are a bit ambiguous. My role is head of growth, but often it's probably more similar to head of other. We're a small team, and so my role is primarily to oversee new client generation, working with our current clients through projects, optimizing marketing, basically just around helping the company grow from where it is today to reach the levels that we think it's going to reach. And so while I'm doing that as well, a lot of my role is also about supporting our team. We've got sales, development, and some admin, legal. And so trying to sit across and make sure everyone's focused on the highest value activity is really where I spend most of my time. So it's a very diverse role, bit of recruitment in there, bit of legal, sort of bit of everything. But it's super rewarding being able to sit across so many things and be part of a rapidly growing startup.
Sounds like you've got many balls to juggle.
Absolutely.
So before you got to Affinda, we might just go back a few steps. That you were a management consultant at Bain & Company after finishing university. What does a management consultant actually do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Management consulting, everyone describes it in different ways, but I think it's sort of a combination of two things. It's problem solving and it's storytelling. And so someone will bring in a management consultant or a management consulting company to try and solve a really hard problem or complete a really hard project that either they're not capable of completing or they don't have the resources because everyone's already super busy on their current jobs. And so the kind of core part of it and, the big part of why a lot of people go into it is the problem solving. And so what you'll do as a management consultant is that you'll sort of spend your time going in, understanding a new client or a new industry and the problem they're facing. You'll try and speak to the organization and the team and the people that you're going to be working with and understand what they think the problem is. And then you'll also support this sort of with your own research, with your own analysis. And, when I was at Bain as well, sort of leveraging the experience that everyone on the team has. So that's really the problem solving side of it, is just about trying to, crack the case is what a lot of people call it. The second part is just as important, and also the skill set that I think people are less aware of when it comes to management consulting is around storytelling. Having the right answer often isn't enough. And just having the right answer just isn't enough. What you've got to do is really twofold. Is you've got to convince people that your answer is right. And that's a big part of it. People have to believe you, people have to be on board, because often you'll leave the company and they have to take the answer and go and implement it and work with it. And so making sure that it is, it's foolproof, it's communicated in the right way, and that you've got all the right stakeholders on board is important. But also it's got to be delivered in a way that kind of inspires change. And so that needs to resonate with the person in the organization who's on the front line if it's relevant to them. And it also needs to resonate with all the way up to the CEO and the board. Because without sort of like buy-in from the organization and whoever's going to be impacted by the solution, without that, it's just not going to be taken forward and it's not going to be embraced. And so that sort of storytelling component and, creating that enthusiasm for change is a really big part of it. And so as long as, you spend a lot of time problem solving, but then communicating that message down to making sure your slides are well formatted, all of those little things add up.
You spoke a bit about you spoke a bit about the implementation and getting people on board with the story or the answer to the case. Do management consultants do any implementation work, or is it all solve the problem and then the company itself does the implementation?
Yeah, it can really vary. I mean, some projects are pure strategy and you'll leave behind a set of recommendations. The answer to an entire project might be one slide with 3 recommendations on it. But there are other projects where management consultants are engaged purely for implementation. So I think generally when there is the role that a management consultant might play in implementation is working collaboratively with the organization, where there might be some components of the problem sort of being worked on and implemented by management consultants. There might be some parts of it that are being implemented by the company, and all of these different bits and pieces need to work together to sort of feed into the final best outcome. And so what you'll often do as a role of implementation is to make sure that each of the projects are tracking along, helping to solve any hiccups or hurdles that are hit along the way, and just making sure that each of the teams and everything has sort of the right resourcing and the right focus so that you really get to the end outcome. So sort of to answer your question, there is often a lot of implementation, but it really does vary a lot. I think that's one of the perks of management consulting is that the project you're working on, kind of first project to second project, can be just completely different.
Anthony, just moving forward a couple of steps as well, and we'll go back to understand your path from education and university course in a little bit. But in the kind of intro call that we had a couple of weeks ago, you spoke about your transition from working as a management consultant, then getting into, say, the equity capital market side of things and being an advisor there at Vesparum before eventually getting into industry. Can you speak about that transition and why you made, or what steps you took, and then why you did take those steps?
Yeah, I think the transition from management consulting is something that management consultants spend a lot of time thinking about. During my time at Bain, I absolutely loved it, and I was committed to working through sort of the junior levels and becoming a consultant. And I think while you spend your time working across different organizations, you're really honing in on what might interest you. So during my time, I worked across, telecommunications, thinking about customer experience, to insurance, thinking about business to business strategy, time in private equity, kind of helping private equity companies do a due diligence on a target that they were thinking of acquiring. And so
just assuming that we're talking to some people will be listening from, say, year 11 and year 12 and maybe even younger. What is private equity and what is due diligence and what is equity capital markets? Can you just elaborate on those a little bit to the extent without going into too much silly detail, but just to explain what those things are?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, definitely pull me up if I use jargon. I'll try not to. All these words sort of become part of the vernacular after a while. So private equity is effectively a method to own a company. And so often, a small business might be owned by the founder, the person who started the business. If you look at Telstra, that's publicly listed, and so it's owned by all its shareholders. Private equity is where a group gets together, a group of partners, and they'll generate money, and then they'll use that to go and buy a company. So private equity is about a company buying other companies to manage them and optimize them. What was the other one? Due diligence. So due diligence is a word that gets thrown around a lot. it's, in a nutshell, it's about making sure you're not wrong. And so a private equity company, if they're thinking about buying another business, they want to do their due diligence. So they want to make sure they're not making a silly decision. And so what our role was in this due diligence would be to go in and understand the market, the competitors, and make sure that all of the reasons they thought that they were buying the business for, that they stack up when you go and have a closer look.
And to essentially make sure that there's no skeletons in the cupboard that you're buying that you didn't know about.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Was there any other jargon I used? I've covered private equity and due diligence.
The last one was equity capital markets.
Yeah. So again, a similar theme around kind of in a way it's related to private equity, where private equity is a group, a small group, or a large organization buying another organization, whereas equity capital markets is the markets are effectively the way that these companies are owned and how people sort of trade their ownership. So when you look at the ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange, it has thousands of companies on it, and these companies are owned by shareholders. Now, the equity capital markets, what they do is they facilitate the movement of shares between shareholders. So when you buy a share, that's via the equity capital markets. If a company is raising money, if they're doing it by issuing shares, that will be equity capital markets. And to round that out, the other side of that is debt capital markets. And so that will be done by, that's when you're raising money through debt rather than issuing shares. And the equity capital markets apply to both listed companies and private companies.
I touch on ECM a lot, equity capital markets a lot at work, and that's the most concise explanation I've heard in 2 or 3 years. So well done. That's very good.
Thank you.
So do you want to elaborate more on your kind of time at Vesparum and what experience you got there that was different to, say, working as a management consultant at Bain, and then what drove your decision to try and get into industry and kind of end up where you are now?
Yeah, so I mean, just to sort of the transition to Vesparum, I think just going back a second, all of the different experiences I got as a management consultant sort of informed my choice to go into the equity capital markets, the issuing and swapping of shares. I think during my time in consulting, I really enjoyed helping individual organizations perform better and optimizing them. But I always knew at the back of my mind, at the end of the day, a lot of decisions are made for shareholders, and occasionally they're informed by the needs of shareholders. And I always had this itch that I wanted to scratch, is to better understand how those decisions are made, how you think about a company from the very highest level, which is, share price. At the end of the day, it's how the CEOs are recognized as performing well or performing badly, often is by share price. And so Vesparum was it's a firm focused on the equity capital markets. They do capital raising for private companies and public companies. So I think that was really interesting, the opportunity to work in a smaller business and working with smaller businesses. And
can you just touch on the difference between, say someone is at university and thinking about getting into finance or even law or anything to do in that professional services area? Often a choice that comes up is working for either private deals or public deals. Can you just touch on the difference there?
The difference between sort of public and private deals?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, they're going to be quite similar, the deals. The deal is about convincing someone to take a stake in a business, convincing them so that, money can go one way and the ownership of a company or part of a company can go the other way. That's all capital raising is. There's lots of jargon that goes around it, but effectively it's money going from A to B and shares going from B to A. And so the difference between a public and a private deal, the public deals, they are sort of by definition, they're often easier to facilitate because they're on the public markets. If the end person gets shares in a company that's public, they can also dispose of those shares. And so they're not necessarily obligated to hold the company for the long term. And so where you're doing a public deal, typically it's often a larger company, but not necessarily that you're doing the deal for. And if it's sort of if it's a kind of capital raising, you might be speaking to a large number of people wanting to put in money. I think there's then, entire acquisitions and mergers and those sorts of activities. I'm probably not the best person to be speaking about them. Sort of, I was primarily in the sort of capital raising where a company was just seeking to get a bit more cash on their balance sheet. But on those public deals, yeah, it is about speaking to a large number of people and building up that share register. On the private side is different primarily because the company is private. It means that once you're owning a private company, it's quite hard to get rid of your shares. And so often you'll be speaking to, there might be slightly fewer investors. There'll definitely be longer term focus. And particularly in the current environment, these deals will typically be more sort of technology focused, and you might be, I think there's a lot of talk around startups and tech, and that's happening for a reason, is because there's a lot of money floating around, and if a tech company does well, the shareholders can benefit. And so on the private side, it'll often be a smaller business, and it'll be about finding the right investor who's willing to go on the journey for the long term with that business and its founders.
I think that's a fantastic explanation of public versus private deals, Anthony. So thank you. Just to go back a few steps, you studied commerce and engineering, and being a management consultant and working in ECM, they're both quite maths heavy type positions. Why did you choose to study commerce and engineering, and how did that feed into your journey?
Yeah, I think probably like a lot of people in high school, my decision might not have been too well thought out. It worked out well in the end, and I wouldn't change my decision, but there wasn't an enormous amount of thinking that went into it. At school, I was good at maths, and so people told me you should do engineering, and that made sense. Engineers work with numbers, so I thought, all right, check, I'll do that. But then I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I wasn't sure what engineering was. And so I just kept my options open, and I decided to throw a commerce degree in there as well. So that was really the honest reason, is just because I was good at maths and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So commerce engineering made sense to me.
Play to your strengths.
Yeah, that's right. I think, look, it's engineering doesn't mean you have to become an engineer. I think engineers are really well recognized, regardless of what sort of you go and try and do in the end. But having the commerce to round it out meant that you're very good at problem solving on the engineering side, but you actually understand some of the details and the noise that comes with kind of working in a business.
And I think that's a common misconception, that engineers only study, or engineering only leads to being an engineer. Because I think studying engineering, it's a very structured way of thinking. And I think that is transferable to a lot of different industries.
Absolutely. I mean, the Spirem where I work, and still have a really good relationship with the founders there, they're a data science firm at the end of the day. They sort of bring data to their decision making. And so because of that, they pride their ability to solve problems and think rationally, and a significant number of the team there are actually engineers who have ended up in finance.
I think that's great. And staying around with the university degree, and more of just a common question, why or what benefit do you think having the double degree brought you? I know you've touched on kind of having the colour of the commerce degree to bring to your problem solving in the business context, but is that something that you would definitely recommend to someone if there is the option to, say, marry up an arts degree with a science degree, or a commerce degree with a law degree? Is that something that you think is beneficial to everyone, or it's dependent on the situation?
Yeah, look, everyone's going to be different. For me personally, I think it is a great idea. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't know what engineering was. I didn't know what any of the business jobs were. And so it was about keeping the options open. And the idea of spending an extra year or two at uni didn't bother me. I know that we work for 40 years, or most people do. So spending, one extra year in uni isn't going to change where you end up. The fact that I did a double degree was really beneficial, particularly given because I just didn't know much. And so, by doing a double degree, it meant that I had the opportunity to do an internship in engineering and actually learn what that was about. I was able to do an internship in the commerce world and learn what that was about. And just by being able to try different things, I was able to eventually hone in on what I wanted to do.
And touching on the internship front, I think it's great that you were able to get one in both disciplines. Do you want to touch on how they came about and what those, application processes were like, and the skills that you learnt there, if any, that you still apply today? Because I think that's a big part of university, is trying to get that real world experience, and sometimes getting the foot in the door is sometimes the hardest thing to do. But yeah, are there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a few what you'd call a proper internship, and then I had one experience that I managed to get through a friend, which was just working in a business. But the two internships, one of them was for engineering. It was the first formal internship that I had. It was in geotechnical engineering, so effectively anything under the ground, making sure that the foundations don't give way when someone puts a building up. The application process, absolutely, it's a key thing. Yeah. The application process was, from what I remember, it was pretty standard. It was first, what they wanted to see was your standard CV, marks, cover letter, and what they were looking for was that your grades were above a certain amount, and that you had done something other than just study at uni. You'd participated in societies. And following up on that was a series of interviews where, they wanted to just understand your enthusiasm, and particularly for this one, your ability to sort of go out on site by yourself as a student and be able to put up with whatever may happen when you're there. So that one, I think that was a really good experience for me, just going through the process. Like, I ended up getting it, but I think even if I didn't, I would have learnt just as much, because you understand the feedback. If you get told no, then being able to understand why is sort of the most valuable lesson you can get, because then when you go for the next internship application, you can kind of take that with you. And I absolutely learned a lot going through that. I answered several questions pretty terribly, but I was lucky enough to get through, and all the feedback they gave me was helpful going forward.
With that, you said that at your current role at Affinda, you're kind of involved in some recruitment. What's it like being on the other side of the fence and reading the resumes and asking the questions, when you look back at, say, your process to get that first internship when you first started out, going through that process on the other side of the table? Yeah,
it's I think it's really good being able to transition from being the one applying to helping people who are applying. I think what I didn't realize as much is that when you're doing the interview yourself, it's a two-way street. Like, the applicant should very much be interviewing you as well and making sure that it's the right company. And so I think I always do think about that as well, is my main focus when I'm interviewing someone is just around making sure that the job is actually right for them and that they are right for the job. And so, the standard things that we look for, particularly if it's a graduate, marks is kind of a hygiene factor for us. There's a threshold that a lot of companies will just have, and typically you need to meet it within reason. There can be some exceptions, but it needs to be met. But then beyond that, what you're looking for are co-curricular activities. I think you want to work with people that are not just going to come in and do the job, but also participate actively in the company and in the culture. There's a buzzword that was thrown around a few years ago called corporate citizenship. What this is around is corporate citizenship is just about not just going into work, doing your job, going home at 5 p.m. It's about going in there and participating, chatting to people at lunch, staying around, joining a social sports team, all those sorts of things that come with actually just being a part of the community that is work, rather than treating it as a job you go to and you leave at the end of the day. So yeah, that sort of transition and being on the other side of the wall, I think it gives you it's certainly helped me. If ever I need to go through an application process again, I'll know what to do and what not to do a bit better.
I think that corporate citizenship point is great because at the end of the day, we do work to get paid, but there's so many other reasons why you go to work, and work is a large part of your life. So it's really important that you really get to know people you work with and appreciate them, understand them, and really want to be there, as opposed to looking at work as something like, oh, okay, I go here for X amount of time and then I get to leave and go do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's sort of a strong belief I have, is that work shouldn't become your life. It absolutely shouldn't consume it, but it is a big part of your life. You spend a considerable number of your waking hours at work. And so it should be enjoyable. You should sort of satisfy all the needs you have, whether they be social, mental, whatever, physical, if you want to join a sports team. Yeah, it definitely, given that you're going to spend so much time there, focusing on how you sort of optimize those hours you spend for your own kind of well-being is pretty important.
With that, Anthony, I think you can probably take a similar approach to, if you enter a 5-year degree at university, you're going to spend, assuming that you're trying relatively hard, you're going to spend a large number of your waking hours working on university work or being at university. What are some bits of advice or recommendations that you'd make a student to, say, get involved in, you mentioned student societies and things of the like, that can make that experience a bit more wholesome and enjoyable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just getting involved is going to be, I just recommend just getting involved in whatever kind of takes your fancy, and do that for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's going to make uni that bit more rewarding. You'll know more people. You won't feel so lonely walking from one building to another in between lectures. You'll build up a bit of a network at uni. And so just being involved, whether it's, if you want to join the Commerce Society, go ahead and do that. If you want to join the ski club, do that. But being actually participating in student life beyond just studying, it certainly made my time at uni it was awesome. I absolutely loved it. But the flip side of that is it's really good for your CV. It's really important that you sort of treat uni and become a corporate citizen at uni, and don't just do your lectures and go home. The things that people look for on a CV, other than marks, are co-curriculars and other internships or work experience. And that co-curricular is well recognised as a big indication of whether you are going to participate well when you're in the workforce.
Speaking of CVs, then the next thing on your CV is we're back to being the head of growth at Affinda. What does Affinda actually do?
Yeah, I think what I do is often a bit unclear. I think I need to. I'm about making the business sort of tick and operate as efficiently as possible. But what Affinda's really focused on is about automating high volume document workflows. That's the jargon that we use. But what that means is that a lot of big organizations have these processes where there are lots of documents going through them. Think about a bank. Whenever someone applies for something, they need to give their information in, and that might be a number of different documents. Those documents need to be processed. Another example would be your application process for when you're applying for an internship. Someone has to read all those resumes.
So people don't read them?
People absolutely do read them, but it is a really high volume thing. Some jobs there'll be 4,000 people, and I think some people don't spend quite enough time on all of them. But at the end of the day, there is still someone sitting there reading them. And so what Affinda's trying to do, and what we are doing, is building clever artificial intelligence models that can actually go through these documents and understand them and pull out key information. So a model that we've just finished building is actually to process resumes. And so what we do is we'll take a few thousand resumes, and if you're someone doing screening for a job, you'll be able to extract out all the key information from that automatically. That'll be person's name, their work experience, what their job title was, their education, what degree did they get. You can infer skills from it. And so for someone that's employing, is staffing a call center and has 4,000 applicants and 50 jobs to fill, they can quickly screen through and check that, rather than manually reading 2,000, they can check off some basic things like, do they have at least 2 years work experience? Do they have previous call center experience? and those sorts of things to sort of surface the best applicants as quickly as possible. And so, resumes is the example, but yeah, in a nutshell, it's just about taking away that manual process and equipping a human with the technology to let them do their job faster. Now, there'll still be a human in there a lot of the time in the loop, but we have a firm view that it's a really tedious and really inefficient part of a lot of businesses, is the way they manage documents, and we're trying to help with that.
I think that goes to what a key thing that gets spoken about when AI is brought up or artificial intelligence is brought up. It's going to take everyone's job and all of that. And I think an important point that you make is that there's still going to be a human there doing these things. It's just going to give them kind of superpowers to do that job a little bit faster and in a more efficient way, just to get it done and make things better for the business. Is that a kind of apt description of that? It's not really going to be taking too many people's jobs, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, look, the jury's out on that one. It's probably all I'm going to say. I think, I think you're right. I think AI will also create jobs. Companies will be able to focus their energy and their teams in different areas and more efficient and beneficial areas. There will definitely be some industries that might end up hurting a bit in terms of the teams that work there from artificial intelligence, but we're definitely a long way off entire businesses being run by a robot.
Just to go back a few steps, what is artificial intelligence, and what types of people or degree types are actually working on building this artificial intelligence?
Yeah, artificial intelligence is just incredibly broad. Software for I'll try and give a summary, but there's plenty of resources online, so I'd recommend anyone interested doing some reading and not relying on what I'm about to say.
We'll put those in the show notes.
Artificial intelligence it's really an evolution of software, or it's sort of a fork of software. So most software, almost all the software you interact with, is rules-based. So if you press this button, then load this page. And that was just how problems were solved, in that a human had to solve it, and then it had to individually go through and tell the computer what to do in a specific situation. What artificial intelligence does is it kind of flips that on its head. So rather than having a rules-based technology, what you do in a nutshell is that artificial intelligence is very good at copying humans and copying decisions. And so if you show it enough examples of what to do in a certain situation, when you show it that situation, it will kind of tell itself, oh, well, of the 500,000 examples I've been shown, when something similar to this has come up, I was told to do this. And so it'll go through and it'll learn from its previous experiences. And so, there's a pretty famous example of telling the difference between a dog and a cat. Before artificial intelligence, computers just couldn't do this. There's thousands of pixels. It's almost impossible to tell it which pixel it should be looking at in which situation. But with AI, it's now incredibly easy. You at home could go and learn about how to do this and actually build a model to solve the old dog or cat problem that humans find pretty easy. So that's really it. AI is very good at copying. And so the applications of that are broad. For us, it's about going through a document and pulling out key information and helping to automate processes. For Tesla, it's about when the car's driving around on the road, it can tell that that's a fire hydrant, that's a person, that's a car, that's a road. And the reason it can do that is it's been told a lot of times that is a fire hydrant, and so on. And so it does get very good at copying, and that's what the whole field is in a nutshell.
I was told by someone I used to work with who was working in AI that a big reason why you get told to click on all the photos that have a car in it or a bus in it or whatever when you're trying to put your password into websites is to feed AI models and tell them this is a car, so then they know for image recognition. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. It's very clever. So yeah, a lot of the biggest businesses in the world, a lot of the big businesses in the world right now, we're about just training that data. And so what Capture did in terms of mobilizing the world to do their data training for them was very sneaky and very clever. So, if you want to get under their
smart
skin,
man, that guy.
Yeah, if you want to get under their skin, don't tell it where the chimney is.
Okay. I'll note that down for next time. Mate, just bouncing around again, and I think people listening will be interested in kind of the co-curricular things that you've done along the journey. You've obviously got a very colourful resume and you're working in a cool area at the moment, but I know that you travelled quite a lot, I think during university, but certainly during your career to date. Do you want to talk a little bit to the travel and some other co-curricular activities that have really benefited you, or that you would recommend that other people take up when we are able to travel and do those kinds of things again?
Yeah, it's a pretty broad one, but I think for me during uni, it was just, I kept up my sport and I got involved with a few university societies. And so keeping up sport sort of kept some structure and normality, and kept me fit and healthy. And so, while uni sort of, you're jumping around a bit, I kept playing touch footy, which kept me in contact with all of those guys. And I've sort of kept that through, even a few years ago with that same group of mates, went across in Singapore and competed in a tournament there, which was a bit of fun.
Awesome.
Do you guys win?
We've been to Singapore twice. We won the first time. I think we tempted a very skillful team across for the journey, and so we got beaten by another Australian team last time, which was a bit of a disaster. But hoping to go back and claim our title, or find another competition where there's where the talent level's a little bit lower for us old guys.
Pick your battles.
That's right. Set the bar really low, and then you'll always get over it. So I think sport was pretty important, and then the societies, like, in terms of sort of who influences my career direction the most, it would be the friends that I made during my time in the Commerce Society. They're all doing different things, and so there's no better way to learn about what sort of direction I can take other than just giving them a call, seeing what they did right, seeing what they did wrong. And so I wouldn't have that network, and I wouldn't have made the career choices I've made without sort of just starting and being on a Commerce Society, which it all started back on Commerce Camp, which was an interesting few days.
Yeah, and there's this idea that I've been pondering probably the last couple of years. It's that if you can expand your footprint of experiences anywhere in any facet of your life, you're kind of just increasing the likelihood that serendipity will happen. And by that I mean that those experiences that would be seen as lucky, like you run into someone that ends up asking you for a job or for a coffee, or something good ends up happening out of that experience, that interaction. The more experiences that you have and the more things that you're involved in, then the more likely that something like that will happen. And it certainly sounds like that was your experience with, say, being in the Commerce Society and things like that. Do you reckon that is something that you buy into and would recommend that people kind of realize that early on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely do most of my learning through experiences. I think, the more you do, obviously, you're going to be able to pick some good things out of that. But I think the sort of my best learning from experiences is from what I just didn't want to do. One of my internships was geotechnical engineering. Nothing against the field, but I learned very quickly it just wasn't for me. And so it made it really easy when I was looking about what I wanted to do, because I knew it wasn't that. Similarly, I went and did an investment banking internship. Super interesting, really smart team, learned a lot. However, for me at the time, it wasn't necessarily I realized it wasn't something I was super passionate about at the time. And so by doing those two things, which, you could sort of describe them as failures, because I went away and spent a lot of time on something that I'll never use again, really. Actually, what it did is it sort of fed me into the world of management consulting, which is where I ended up. So the more you do, the more you'll fail. But I reckon that's a pretty good thing.
Anthony, on the topic of failures, do you have one in particular that's your favourite?
One that's my favourite. I'm not even sure how to interpret that well. A failure that's my favourite.
Maybe that you've learnt the most from, or it's been the most productive afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think it would be just I was a scared deer in the headlights when I started at Bain and Company as a management consultant. The biggest failure I had was that I, usually reasonably outgoing, but I just sort of went silent when I started and didn't talk and didn't participate. And the reason I did that is because, you'd be sitting in a room with people who are probably much smarter than you and they have a lot more experience. And so if they're in the room as well, why would your input be valued was sort of the approach I took. And what that meant is that I probably wasn't actively participating as much as I should have been. And also the perception from other people in the room was that I was sort of not interested. Whereas how I was interpreting it was, hey, you guys have got this, I don't want to get in your way. It probably took me sort of 9 months to a year to really completely move past that. I did get a bit of negative feedback that I was being perceived as lazy, and that sort of shocked me because that absolutely wasn't the case. It was just that, when there's someone smarter than you with more experience, why would your input be valued? And so when I got that feedback and sort of realized the mistake I'd been making and started participating more, I realized that sometimes I did have good things to say. Sometimes I had stupid things to say, but, a lot of the time it was pretty good. And it also meant that I was more engaged. It meant that I was sort of giving energy to my team by participating, so they didn't have to do all the heavy lifting. And so I think that that experience of going into an organization where I didn't know what I was doing, everyone was smarter and had more experience, but realizing that there is benefit in just actively participating as much as possible, regardless of how ambiguous the problem might be. That kind of shaped the next 2 or 3 years in management consulting, and has absolutely shaped my entire career. That very slow and steady 6 months that I started with.
I think that's a pretty common experience because people start in a new team, in a new job, and they don't really know what they're doing. So I think there's a lot of people out there who would feel the exact same way. How did you take that feedback and get over that initial thought of, okay, well, maybe I am one of the smart people in the room, and I do have a license to contribute?
Yeah, I think everyone's going to sort of get over it differently. Some people will just go in and participate immediately. There's obviously, you've got to be reasonable. You're not going to be running the show on your first day. But I think in any organization, I think realizing that I was a part of the team, after the conversation was over where we maybe solved the problem or figured out the next step, I would be doing a lot of the work. I'd be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so by sort of knowing that I could go away and execute to a reasonable level, I felt like it gave me a right to speak up when we were actually planning the work or solving the problem. And so just sort of realizing that I was a value added part of the team and that what I was doing, it might not have been the highest value work, but it was benefiting the team. That kind of gave me confidence. And I found that once I spoke up once, it became very easy. And so it just took me a little while to realize that. And I sincerely wish someone had told me that slightly sooner in my career, because it was I had a pretty quiet 6 or 9 months at the start.
With that, Anthony, I think we can wrap this up pretty here, because I think we've got a lot of good things to take away from this, and I think a lot of people are going to find it quite beneficial. But to steal a question from probably my favorite podcaster, Tim Ferriss, if you can have one kind of sentence or a thought on a billboard for thousands of millions of people to see, and probably you yourself maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago to see, what would that bit of advice be, do you think?
I think it's got to go back to the do more and try different things. I think it'd really be around bad experiences are very beneficial because you always take something away from them. So don't be afraid of making mistakes and failing, because those have been sort of the most useful lessons I've learned.
Oh, great. I think that's a great place to leave it. So, mate, thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate your time. And as we said, I think there's definitely some good points for everyone to take away from that chat. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Anthony.
No problem. Good to chat today.